Welcome to Unapologetically Sensitive, where you can learn, relate, laugh, and maybe even live a bolder, brighter life. I'm your host, Patricia Young. This is a weekly podcast where we explore the strengths we have because of our sensitivity and some of the challenges it poses as well. The information in this podcast is not a substitute for help from a licensed mental health professional. Hey there. To the creatives, healers, sensitives, and deep thinkers, how the heck are you? We're about 1 month into 2023. How's it going so far? Hopefully it's feeling content, fresh, new. I don't know. And if it's not, that's okay too. Today's episode with Jen, we talk a little bit more about attachment wounds. What are they? How do they start? What do they look like? What are some of the things that can activate them? How can you recognize if you are in a place where you're having some attachment wounds? And at the end, I have a list of calming, soothing things that may help you if you're having a hard time and you're struggling. Sometimes we just need to have that loving, gentle voice of telling us, it's okay. It's safe to have needs. You matter. You're okay. So if you like that, stay tuned till the end. But in this episode, Jen talks about attachment is really about ongoing rupture and repair and expecting that to happen. I talk about some of the ways that I know that I'm having some attachment wounds. Jen's perspective is she's always anticipating it and she works on dropping the defensiveness, being curious about everything. We talk about some specifics that we look for. I know that attachment wounds, friendships, challenges in relationships are something that many of my clients and people in the groups that I'm in talk about. I think these are conversations that we need to have on an ongoing basis. And my intention is to break the shame around it. I really went through this thing last night. I was crying to Jen, like, I hate having needs. I hate this. I don't want to have needs for another 6 months. I'll have needs again in June. That's about my attachment wounds, that it's normal to have feelings and to need connection and to need reassurance and to have that need to be seen and heard. So if that resonates for you, this is really important work and it takes a lot of courage to do this work. I think that's all I have to say. And now, on to the show. Hey, Jen, how are you?
Hi, Patricia. I'm doing okay.
Yeah.
I'm me, which apparently comes with adjectives like harried, overwhelmed, flying by the seat of my pants, but also cheerful, happy to be connected with you.
Me too. You have a lot going on. You have a lot more moving pieces in your life.
I'm waiting for that to start to end. Like it does, right? At some point.
It does. You've got a little while to go, though.
I'm in the bumpy part of the journey.
You are.
How about you, my dear?
You're doing great. I'm good. It was 43 degrees when I left the house this morning to paddle. We did a 6.2 mile ocean paddle. It was gorgeous. Just gorgeous. Totally worth the cold.
That sounds wonderful.
Yeah, it was nice. It's a great way to start the day. I want to talk about attachment injuries today. Last night, Jen, you reminded me when we were on the phone that it was attachment injuries that were going on. And I kind of knew it, but I don't think that I really recognized it. So I think what I want to do is to have you talk a little bit about how attachment injuries show up and how they affect us. And then we can go into specific content if you're okay with that.
Sure. How attachment injuries show up and how they affect us.
Mm-hmm.
Like the origin story of them.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of like, I don't think that I knew I was having some attachment stuff going on, but I don't know that we make those connections. And what feels like depression, at least for me, was really about needing to feel seen and heard and feeling like I was too much. And so I'm not saying that people don't have depression and I don't want to be dismissive of that, but I'm confident that for a lot of my life when I thought I was depressed, it was about attachment injuries and feeling disconnected and feeling like I was too much and feeling lonely and there wasn't a place where I fit in and I belonged. And especially around the holidays, even though you'll be hearing this in the end of January, I think the holidays really stir up a lot of this.
Yeah, definitely. Absolutely. I mean, I'm trying to think about how to discuss this, right? Like the way in, like, what are we even talking about? What are attachment wounds? I had somebody in my life recently who I said that word to a lot, and they didn't really understand what it was. And I don't know that I did a very good job of explaining it. So I guess to start, there was something I wanted to say first to kind of frame the discussion. It was that even though we're trained in this as therapists, you and I have spent a whole lot of time in all kinds of trainings, grad school, when it's happening to me, and last night when it was happening to you, it's so hard to see. Like, we need each other. A therapist needs a therapist or, someone knowledgeable. It doesn't have to be a therapist. It can be a coach, can be someone who gets it, to just make life easier. And where I'm going on in my mind now is, again, addressing the stigma of like mental health, and also being humble as a therapist. I mean, it's not like we have everything together. And then I used to feel that way so deeply, like, what's wrong with me? Right.
Mm-hmm.
And I talk about goodness of fit because people sometimes, if they just don't feel connected and then assume that like, oh my gosh, even a therapist can't help. It's just the wrong paradigm to come at it all together. So I was just thinking about that. And I will say that all of my clients have heard that at this point, that I can't see it when I'm in it and I need someone helping me to see it. Especially after I do a lot of psychoeducation, I'll even say like, you could do this for me, but you're not. You don't have to take care of me. I have my own therapist. And it's just the nature of the arrangement, the professional roles. Anyway, so it's almost like our own personal paradigm happens when we're really, really young. We get born and we're these very, very underdeveloped beings that rely 100% on the stability of a caregiver to meet all of our needs. Babies have some way of evoking that, usually crying, right? And it's such a slow development, and there's so many opportunities to make sense of the world in a very uncritical way. Someone gave me the example once that like a little kid, let's say maybe 10 or 11, making the statement that at all the family dinners that the kids get the legs and the dark meat and only grown-ups can eat the white meat because that's what observed. It's not like someone stood up at the table and said, okay, this is the way it is, because it's not the way it is. It's just what they observed. So that's something kind of silly and simple talking about that food. But now go into an unspoken, unconscious, this is how I get my needs met. And this is the mirror that's getting reflected back to me about who I am. So it's HSP. So what did we hear? You're too much. You're too sensitive. What's wrong with you? And my guess is that a very small percentage of all of our caregivers have taken many child development courses and really understand the way that this works. So when we're talking...
Or looked at their own wounding and how their own limitations show up because they never got it, or they're just doing what they were told, or they feel overwhelmed, and kids need a lot.
Absolutely. And they're tired or hungry or hangry or or they're just passing on the kind of conventional wisdom that was given to them. Children are seen and not heard. Spare the rod, spoil the child. And obviously, I don't believe in any of these things, but sometimes they genuinely feel like they're doing the right thing by doing some of these things. If we're not taught to be critical thinkers, if we're not taught to trust our experience, if we're taught to trust experts a little too much sometimes, right? Depending on what the expert is saying. So attachment patterns, ways we learn that we have to get our needs met, right? So a lot of us learn that we have to hustle, right? And I think it's fairly universal that in facing the threat of my caregiver that has to take care of me doesn't know what they're doing or is overwhelmed or unstable in some way, or inconsistent, that's too scary. And I suspect to a young child also like too big.
Mm-hmm.
And so children are naturally what we call egocentric, right? They see their own perspective first. Is that it's my fault? Or if only. Like if I have clients track all of their like if onlys. If only I do this, then that. So if only I get it right. And this is where we blame ourselves for so many things, or decontextualize ourselves, and then I think an attachment injury, it's kind of a matter of severity, right? So hopefully, in an ideal space, and nothing's ideal. I mean, attachment is a dance of rupture and repair. There's not a situation in human life on planet Earth where there isn't going to be ruptures. And it's the very fear of there being a rupture sometimes. You just walk right smack into the rupture. I remember being a new mom and feeling so much idealized pressure on myself that my kids were going to have a different experience, and I was utterly unrealistic in all of that. So some of us have had to hustle. Very few people, I think, could just really rest in the attachment. At least in my, and granted, I generally hang around people that are asking these questions and looking at this. I don't know. Is there anything you would add to that so far?
Well, I think that what happens then is that if we're not hustling, then we learn to make ourselves very small. Part of that is for me at least, to not have needs, to make sure that I didn't create any more stress in the environment. If any of this relates to you, there's an amazing book called The Drama of the Gifted Child by Alice Miller. If you're someone who feels like you're responsible for all the things that happen, she goes into depth about what Jen is talking about, that as children, our lives depend on our caregivers. So we can't go, oh, mom's an alcoholic, dad's a narcissist, my parents are having a hard time and they don't have room for me. It like Jen said, it's about us. I need to be more quiet. I need to be more helpful. I need to be more whatever that is that you got in your household. But what we learn is that how we show up in the world is not okay, and that our needs aren't okay. And what happened for me yesterday, I've been going for a couple of days and I haven't wanted to talk about it because I know that it's not what's going on. So often these things come up in the present moment, and it's stuff around the holidays and gifts and how my husband and my kids interact. And I don't really want to go into specific detail because it's not about that. And if they heard it, I think it would feel hurtful. And I know it's not about that. And my husband knew something was going on with me and was kind of apologetic and wanting to help and fix. And I just kind of go quiet because it just felt like he would make it about him, and it wasn't. But what it activated for me was a sense of, I don't matter. I'm not important. Everybody else gets stuff, time, attention, energy. I think as moms, we often have this idea, not an idea, we have a knowledge of what everybody needs. And we keep track of who likes this and who needs that, and this appointment and the dog and the medicine and the groceries and the laundry, and with the holidays, all of that stuff. So we carry a really big load. We notice things that other people may not notice. Sometimes we say something, sometimes we don't. So there's a lot of moving parts. And I knew this stuff was going on. I'd been talking about it with you for 2 days. I continued to exercise. I was doing the things that I know work. And I felt like I was depressed, but I knew it wasn't depression. But getting very quiet, getting very small. And then you offered yesterday if we could talk last night, and I wasn't sure. And then we did. And really what I just needed was connection. I didn't even need to process that much, but there was something about, and I started out by crying like, I hate having needs. I hate having needs. I hate needing this, that's an attachment wound. Just having human feelings and needing connection. That's a healthy thing that we're wired for, but this is where attachment wounds show up of, I'm too much, and I even said, like, do you have the space? Are you okay? I know it's late, all this taking care of you. And you had asked me this morning how I was doing, and it just, that connection and feeling seen and heard and valued, and you going like, oh my gosh, I get what it's like as a mom to feel like you're the last one to get noticed. It just like, and I wanted to talk about this today because I'm sure this goes on for other people, and kind of circling back to, I'm wondering for some of you, how often do you think that you're depressed or anxious? And it might be about attachment wounds. Am I going to be seen? Am I going to get my needs met? Am I going to get heard? That's also how attachment wounds can come up. And for me, it's helpful to know that it's not depression, it's something else, but still having to be present to it.
Yeah. Well, I think also like what's helping to alleviate it, right? Like I think that was pretty clear. You were working out, like you were doing the things that might lean more towards depression. What worked, right? And it is hard. I mean, we use all these different categories and I think there's so much overlap and it may very well be for some people depression and you know what I mean? It's not like it's like all of these systems are just our way as human beings to try to make sense out of ourselves and the world. And they need to constantly be criticized and edited.
Right. Right.
But what struck me was how much it was connection, right? It was, you matter, it's safe to have needs. And this would go the same for me. I wasn't the one that was activated, but this could be me and has been. I've had those moments of feeling utterly humiliated because I have needs. When I say hustle, I mean anything that isn't just being able to rest in the attachment, right? So sometimes you're right. It is making yourself smaller. Don't have any needs at all. Don't tick anybody off. Walk around on eggshells. And then that plays out in our relationships, right? I might be walking around on eggshells with my boss or my sister or my spouse, because that's what I've learned to do. That's like children get the drumstick and adults are only allowed to eat the white meat, right? It's like, or the breast meat. So, and that all it's all unconscious so much of the time.
Right. I think the other thing that historically I've done, and I'm wondering if this is relatable to you, the listener, is I would get very irritable. And it would feel like if my husband or my kids did X, Y, and Z, then I would feel better. And so I made them jump through hoops and I was very difficult to please. And my guess is that some of my husband's sensitivity these days is because of in the past thinking like, if you just did this and if you only did that and if you did this, then I'd feel okay. And there's always a chance that it's about something in the moment. For me, this really activated more from my past. And I had this awareness because I know my family loves me. I know they care. I could think of things that they've done that show that they care. And I told you, it's like the vortex or circling the drain. And it felt like I was just hanging on to the edge by my fingers, that I knew I wasn't in it, but it felt like if I let up, I'd just drop down into that. And I think we all have these narratives of whatever it is when we circle the drain. I don't matter. I don't fit in. Everybody else gets their needs met. I'm the oddball. I'm the weirdo. I'm too much, whatever that is. And I was kind of on the precipice.
Yeah.
And I want to say it takes a lot of courage for Jen and I to share with you the things that we go through. I often wonder, do people think that they don't want to see me because it looks like I don't have my stuff together? And if that's what your feeling is, then that's totally fine. But I'll tell you, if you're going to work with a coach or a therapist, you want someone who's willing to do their own work. It takes a lot of bravery and courage and vulnerability. And this is how we become authentic. This is how we live our true lives and kind of become our best selves. And if you view it as a weakness, that's totally okay. But I'll tell you, it takes so much courage and strength. And if you have professionals that you're working with that are doing their own work, you are going to get such a different experience from them than someone who just is going to go by the book and tell you what they learned in school, but have little or no experience about. And I don't mean to throw shade on any therapist when I say that, but.
I mean, I think having been at this for a while, it's the embodiment of what we learn and then being able to apply it really flexibly. And I was taught not to self-disclose.
Me too.
And to me, that feels like some form of gatekeeping and separation to enhance the appearance of that like expert status, actually, which now I'm all salty about. I'm really upset about it. And that's a thread I see kind of going through our entire society that's really dangerous. And I've seen it in my clients' faces, when I self-disclose skillfully the universality of suffering and the universality of challenge and of bewilderment and confusion.
Yeah. When it's done with intention and not to have anybody take care of us and not to just like, oh, you have this experience I did too, and I want to relate to you. That's not the intention. But the intention to go, I hear you, I see you, I have that same struggle, or I've experienced that, or I know what that's like. That can be so powerful and connecting.
Normalizing.
Mm-hmm.
That's really like so much of it. My favorite quote, right? I'm human and therefore nothing human is foreign to me. Everything's on a continuum, of course. So, and I don't know, I've just seen what it can do when we own it. And I have clients come in with the opposite of that, right? I've had clients sit there and be like, well, you never get angry, do you? It's like, oh boy. And do we really think? I mean, I think I bought into that for a while, that there were just people out there that never did.
And that was the goal.
Right. As opposed to the natural, it's just a natural human emotion to experience. And I think that's where we get hung up, right? It's not the emotion. It's funny. It's the trying to get rid of the emotion in the body that leads to some of the behaviors that scare us and that are problematic about anger.
Right.
It's actually, again, you walk right smack into it. It's not okay for me to feel angry. Ooh, I feel it. I got to get it out of my body. I'm going to smack something.
Or you push down, and then you have a meltdown because you didn't want to get angry. What I'm thinking, Jen, and I can talk about some of my things, like if the listeners are thinking, how do I know when I'm in that place where I'm having attachment wounds? Because I can remember a time in my life where upset would happen so quickly that I couldn't even tell what happened. And as I've done more of my work, the process slows down and you go, oh, I'm sharing a feeling and the other person's invalidating me. Oh, I'm feeling like I'm not good enough. And so I'm not saying anything. Oh, I'm kind of in this place where I need to be direct about what I want and I just can't. When the process slows down and we can see that. So some of the things that I know that I'm getting into a slippery place, it's a different type of swearing, but I get angry swearing, like everybody's blankety blank, blankety blank. And I told you about, I had a plan to paddle with someone on Friday. And on Monday, I was anticipating them canceling. So that framework of, I'm not going to get my needs met, things aren't going to work out. It can be hypervigilance about people into your stuff. It could be trying to control and manage people, getting impatient with people, usually the people closest to you, your partners, your kids, your coworkers, your boss, not listening to you, not understanding, not getting it. Those are some of the ways that I see that showing up when it happens. I'm not important. Other people are getting stuff that I'm not. Do you have any things that come to mind about how you know when you're maybe entering that space?
These days, I assume that it's always there. And so I've been trying to nurture this, like, okay, it's going to be there. And not only is it there for me, it's there for everybody else. So dropping like defensiveness, seeing it as an opportunity for intimacy when something's kicked up, and staying really curious about myself and other people. And instead of, it usually shows up with some sort of conflict. And the if only this, and whether it's someone else's behavior or your own behavior, I don't know if you'd agree with this, but it's almost like there's usually some sort of perfectionism or not accepting something about human nature that's kind of afoot, right? So I'm like, what am I not accepting?
Yeah. I know that the if only is often control, that I often would focus on my husband or my kids. Like if he would only be more considerate, if they only thought of me, if they only, if they only prioritized me, that I would often externalize and control just because that's what I learned how to do.
Yeah. Shoulds. I would think, so there's if only, and there's like, he shouldn't do this or they shouldn't do that. Right. Whereas like acceptance is, well, of course they did because we're messy humans,
Right.
And then there's a corresponding felt sense in my body that I've been really trying to tune into more and more. So if I'm holding a lot of tension, and I really do, I hold a lot of tension. That's like, okay, what do I need to soften, soothe, and allow, to use a Kristen Neff technique, right? What's here that I'm not accepting? What am I railing against? Like, where's the inner, whatever age? Because usually we get a little memory stamp and I don't know. I use neural net. I don't know like much brain stuff is behind it, but how our memories are encoded and stuff like that, what's gotten kicked up. So it's useful for me to think that there's a part. And sometimes, especially when I can't make any sense of it out at all, it's pre-verbal. We're talking about a little baby in there whose nervous system is completely dysregulated. And it feels really confusing and humiliating to have needs. So the more I always think of it as like breadcrumbs, the more I can step towards a feeling of spaciousness and acceptance of the craziness of it all. And acceptance doesn't mean we don't do our work to try to change it or ameliorate suffering. It just means being really rooted in the reality of how messed up things are underneath this veneer of what it should look like.
Yeah.
Or there's the should again, right? Like, or could look like if only, or.
Yeah.
I hope that answers your question.
Yeah. And I think having a lot of self-compassion, because I know that these are the times when I become more disempowered. It's much harder for me to articulate my needs, to ask for things. I get a little bit more, either I don't have needs, or I get wishful, or I get more indirect, because in that young place, it wasn't okay to have needs. And I can see it happening. And here I am again. And so having compassion for those young parts and knowing that, so it would be easy to have a narrative of like, oh, I got disempowered and I got quiet for a couple of days and I wasn't direct about my needs. Or I can go, gosh, isn't it amazing that I did not get irritable? I was aware of what's going on. The kindest thing I knew how to do was to just kind of pull back in. I stayed connected. You offered to talk, and I did that. And to see that we're doing it differently, but it's so easy if you grew up blaming yourself for everything, that even when you walk through something, it's easy to have that narrative of it shouldn't have happened. You should have done it better. So that sense of just lots of self-compassion, I think, is so important.
Yeah, absolutely. And being okay, like not really knowing. This is where I often will say, like, I think the questions are more important than the answers, right? Because the certainty of I messed up or I shouldn't be this way, like that's it. If I can be holding it with like, I wonder what's going on right now. Gosh, what's up with me? As opposed to, why am I, blah, 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 blah. You know?
Yeah.
I used to get so frustrated. Why am I going through this again? And it's like, well, yeah, because you're still human.
Yeah.
You still have a nervous system.
And sometimes we do all the things that I was thinking I did tapping the other day because I knew I was off. Like maybe if I do some tapping, that'll help. And resting well, and feel like on the checklist of things I didn't like, it still was hard. Like that's okay. That's okay.
Yeah. Yeah, it really is okay.
Yeah. Anything else on this before we wrap up, Jen?
To be continued. Right.
All right. Well, thanks for being here today, Jen. I appreciate you.
Always my pleasure. I appreciate you too, my dear.
All right. Have a good one. Bye.
Bye.
Hey again. So I'm curious to know, was that helpful? Did it resonate for you? Do you relate? How do you feel when you have needs come up? What I'm going to do now is I'm going to read some things that I'm hoping are soothing and comforting. And then at the end, if you're interested in working with Jen or I'm going to talk to you about that. But my hope is that you can get into a place that's quiet, close your eyes, and just really breathe this in and use it as a sound bath, something loving, nurturing, comforting. It's safe to have needs. You matter. Your needs are valid. It's okay to have feelings. It's okay to have big feelings. It's okay to want time and attention. You are important. You have a right to be seen. You have a right to be heard. You have a right to be valued. You have a right to be cherished. You have a right to be cared about. You are lovable. You are valuable. You are precious. It's okay to rest. You are not too much. How was it hearing that? Did you have resistance that came up? Did it feel yummy? We need to have this sense of love and comfort and that everything's okay and that we're okay. And many of us didn't get it. So if that's helpful, listen to it over and over again. If attachment wounds resonate with you, relationships, friendships, parenting, you have struggles, Jen and I love doing this work. We're good at it. We rock at it. If you want to work with Jen, you can reach her at jen@heartfulnessconsulting.com. If you want to work with me, you can reach out to me at unapologeticallysensitive.com. We both offer consults. If you're not sure, set up a consult with each one of us and find somebody that's a really good fit for you. I hope you found this helpful. I hope you're doing well. If you're just doing okay, that's okay. If you're not doing well, please reach out and get support. Being an HSP means that sometimes things are not easy. That's part of being human, but we don't want you to be suffering. Suffering is not part of it. I think that's all I have. Remember, sensitivity is nothing to apologize for. It's your superpower. Have a blessed day.